Erik, Chapter 22. The next period of my life was full of upheaval and changes. Sarah and I picked out a fashionable little home and moved into it. We had to come up with a compromise of sorts. I was allowed to keep heavy drapes drawn in my study and our bedroom, but she insisted that we let natural light flow into the main floor. Sometimes I wondered sadly to myself if I would ever feel completely comfortable in the bright sunshine, but Sarah's presence gave me a powerful incentive to put my discomfort aside. Our home contained 3 bedrooms, as well as quarters for the cook and the butler in the attic. One of the bedrooms was taken over for my aforementioned study, but the third remained empty except for some pieces of furniture that had nowhere else to go yet. I thought this space would make an excellent nursery someday, but I was not sure what Sarah would have to say about that. She never spoke of whether or not she actually wanted a child. One day, I surprised her leaning against the doorway of the 3rd bedroom, looking wistfully into it. A large sigh escaped her lips, and she turned with downcast eyes to walk away and go do something else. She froze as she saw me there and realized I had seen how badly she wanted a child. She burst suddenly into tears. I sprang forward and caught her by the shoulders, leading her down to the sitting room and making her comfortable on the settee. I lent her my handkerchief and rang the bell to summon the cook, asking her for some tea. Sarah gradually got herself under control and sat staring into space, looking almost numb in the aftermath of her attack of emotion. I waited for her to speak, but I almost missed her tiny voice when it came.
I'm sorry, Erik. It's just, I thought I'd be with child by now. I want a child so badly, and I think you do, too?
She raised her eyes to my face, finally breaching the question between us. I considered for a split second. While I knew that babies came with all manner of upheaval and noise and bodily mess, I could not deny that being a father would make me feel even more normal than being married did. It seemed I was fated to spend my life chasing after the trappings that made a man accepted by society, even though I rationally knew I could make my way just fine without them. But that wasn't my main consideration. Clearly, the most important thing here was that Sarah wanted a child, and I would still go to the ends of the earth for her to make whatever she wanted to come to pass. I assured her that I did indeed want children, trying to strike a tone that balanced between wanting them and not reproaching her for not giving them to me yet. I reassured her that they would come in their own good time. She sighed wistfully again and kissed me tenderly. 8 more months passed, with no success. Sarah filled the house with unnecessary greenery and ribbons in December. Then we celebrated the turn of the century, greeting the year 1900 with all of our friends at the carnival. Then I celebrated my 30th birthday, wondering all the while if she had some good news she was waiting to share on the auspicious date. All 3 occasions came and went with no such announcement. I had heard of couples going through this hellish waiting who became more and more desperate and ceased to take any pleasure in each other's presence. I did not want that to happen to Sarah and I, so I asked her to make an appointment with a doctor she trusted. The doctor examined us both. After completing his examination, he called us both back into his office. I held Sarah's hand as the doctor told us it was very likely that she was infertile. Shocked, I gathered her into my arms as she went completely to pieces, sobbing against my shoulder and apologizing over and over. I reassured her that it was all right and that I still loved her. As before, it wasn't my feelings that mattered when I heard that the 3rd bedroom would be forever empty. but I wished with all my heart I could have spared Sarah the grief she was feeling. The doctor mentioned one other thing to me in passing, something that I felt to be worth investigating further. He sat me down in his consultation room a few weeks later and told me that surgical techniques had advanced to the point where he felt he could carve away the extra flesh on my lips and smooth down the roughness of my cheek. He couldn't do anything about the missing flesh of my nose or my drooping eyelid, but he thought perhaps he could make a slit in my scalp and insert a plate under the skin over the place where my skull is missing. He cautioned me that the skull prosthetic might stretch my skin too much and make it hard for the incision to heal. He also said that there was a very high chance that removing the excess flesh from my lips would cause them to be forever numb. I thought about what it might be like never to feel Sarah's kiss on my lips again. It wasn't a hard decision after that. I thanked him and told him I wasn't interested. He seemed almost disappointed as he showed me out. While all this drama was happening at home, things at my carnival were moving swimmingly. I had so many performers now that I had 2 different shows I could alternate throughout the day. This gave the performers in each show more leisure to work on their craft between performances and rest, and the quality of their performances went up by leaps and bounds. We started selling a 2-for-1 ticket, which gave the customers an incentive to stay for both shows, and they flocked to the food vendor stalls between showtimes to ease their hunger pangs. I had finally fulfilled my plan of building a theater at my carnival. It was a rough wooden building that looked more like a barn than a center for the performing arts, but it had a stage, a curtain, and seats for an audience. In a place where it wasn't normal for patrons to dress to the nines to come spend an evening at an elegant theater, my rough version was all we needed. I longed to see a fancier building or even a bona fide opera house. I had one already planned in my head that had more amenities, but I told myself to show a little patience. My bank account wouldn't support it yet. I couldn't resist hiring an architect to draw up the plans for me, though, and I spent many odd moments daydreaming over them once they arrived. Antoinette captained a troupe of dancers, training them to give beautiful, exciting performances. Not many of them had the training of a French ballet dancer, as she and Meg did, but between them both they imparted the basics to every girl in the group. Antoinette commissioned fantastic costumes for her girls and painted scenery pieces to match. The shows they gave began to truly sparkle, although I sensed that Antoinette might never be satisfied with any of the talent on this side of the Atlantic. She never spoke much of her time in San Francisco, but I sensed that a similar dissatisfaction with the available talent there had caused her to give up the position and return across the country. Sarah pitched in and made herself useful too. While I had no need for her to slave away and sell her confectionery, she hung around my office and became my private secretary. She was always meticulously organized, and I found it satisfying to discuss a problem I was having with her and get her input. For example, I soon tired of the name Carling & Sons, as there was no Carling now involved with my show at all. Any name that involved and Sons, or and Brothers, would only sadden Sarah and I, as we had neither sons nor brothers. LeBlanc Family Carnival struck me as boring and unappealing, and Sarah agreed. Together, we searched for a name that would indicate to the customer that there was an indefinable magic and mystery to be found within our gates, accessible to all who paid the ticket price. I was telling Sarah yet another story from my days as the Phantom of the Opera, when she sat bolt upright on her chair.
That's it! That's what you must call it!
She was illuminated by her inspiration, and I felt a surge of love for her as I asked her what her idea was. She looked at me with mock solemnity and intoned,
"I hereby christen this carnival Phantasma, in nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti."
I rolled my eyes at her pretended religiosity, but then moved across the room to kiss her for her brilliance. It was Phantasma from that moment on. She thought for another moment or two, then christened me Mr. Y, which, of course, is very nearly mystery. I quite liked this, although I wished that it worked as well in my native French as it did in English. I experimented with calling her Madame Y once or twice, but it did not have nearly the same ring that my moniker had, and I gave it up. I insisted that all my staff refer to me as Mr. Y from then on, as it heightened the intrigue for the customers. As our prominence in the entertainment district grew, so too did the presence of the proverbial wolves at the door. I had a stack of at least 5 lawsuits on my desk from various other entertainment moguls, all alleging that I had stolen their star performers and ruined their enterprises. I knew none of them had actually shut down their shows after their performers jumped ship, but merely replaced them with other, sometimes lesser, talent. I remembered the Paris Opera doing much the same thing. It must be a common tactic in show business. For my own part, I always tried to let every one of my performers know that I would miss them if they exercised their right to move on. It was remarkable how few of them ever did. 3 of my performers became especially useful to me, and I put them in charge of running the shows, introducing every performer and keeping the crowds excited. There was Dr. Gangle, who was incredibly tall, Mr. Squelch, who had built up massive muscles, and Miss Fleck, who was a little person. I had to admire my lawyer's work. He had defended me in court so brilliantly that the other show owners in the area began to give up. One by one, they decided that it wasn't worth their costs to sue me, not when there were so many other nearly talented people that could be snapped up. I never heard of any of them improving working conditions at their establishments, however, a fact which continued to work in my favor to assure a constant influx of the best and brightest that America had to offer. On Sarah's advice, I sought out a different lawyer for my personal affairs. I left my will in Monsieur Cuthbert's capable hands. I left the entire carnival to Antoinette and Meg, and left my own rapidly growing fortune to Sarah. I wanted to be prepared if the worst should ever happen to me. I never wanted anyone I cared about to be left destitute if I could prevent it. I knew that my fine clothing and my gentlemanly mien could not prevent a random attack by a brigand as I walked home alone in the evenings. In fact, it might provoke one. I went to a rag shop and picked out the dingiest hat and cloak I could find and wore them to and from the office every morning and evening. I hoped to make myself look like less of an easy target. I heard the approving whispers among my staff, as they all thought I wore the humble clothing out of personal humility. I let them think this. To prevent attacks, I still carried my garrote with me at all times. It was an innocent-looking weapon, but I knew from experience that I could use it to cut off someone's air in a matter of moments. On the whole, things were running so well that I began to have time to write some music down again. The flow of music through my head had never really dried up again since Meg had retrieved my onyx ring, not even when I'd taken the ring off and placed it in the safe deposit box. Sarah told me that she'd often wake in the night to hear me humming something under my breath as I slept. I tried to teach her how to write music, hoping she'd be able to capture on paper some of these phrases that I never seemed to be able to remember in the morning. But she proved unequal to this task, no matter how many ways I tried to teach her. It saddened me somewhat that this central part of who I was remained closed off from the woman I loved. But I had run out of strategies to remedy the situation. I purchased for myself a lustrous grand piano and had it moved into the second sitting room on the main floor. I turned this into a music room, adding shelves for music and books and giving my violin a place of honor. I began to miss the challenge and the visceral thrill of playing my pipe organ and feeling its rumble vibrate through me, but Sarah put her foot down and refused to let me install one in our home. I made an agreement with a local church organist, however, giving him carnival tickets in exchange for regular access to the massive instrument there. That gave me a deeper thrill than my little Parisian pipe organ had ever managed. On our third wedding anniversary, I took Sarah to a fancy dinner at my brand new casino. This establishment was intended to be an evening outing for people, so it had a dress code that was much more like what I had been used to in Paris. We dined on lobster and drank fine champagne, and we were entertained by the best of the best from my carnival, who had been moved over to the casino to entertain a higher class of people. Sarah only sipped at the champagne, which I found odd, as I knew she considered it quite delicious. We sat side by side on the bench seat at our table, feeding each other bits off our plates and watching the show on the main level below us. The singer below us finished her song, bowed, and walked off the stage. I picked up another morsel of lobster on my fork and brought it to Sarah's lips. Her beautiful red lips opened and she took it off my fork, but then she put her hand over mine to stop me getting another piece for her.
Erik.
Something, I couldn't name just what, made me stop fishing around among the ruins of the lobster and look at her. She looked as if she were bursting with a secret.
Erik,
she said again.
I have something I have to tell you.
Wild hope rose up within me. She had told me many secrets over our years together, but she had never been this excited before. She looked like she was about to explode with happiness, and I felt a matching joy bloom within my own heart. Even if it wasn't what I suspected it was, the fact of her happiness made me happy all by itself. She took my hand.
Erik, you are going to be a father. In about 6 months' time.
I was struck speechless, even though I had suspected what she was about to say. Again, I was initially more pleased for her and for the fulfillment of her hopes than I was for my own. My mind raced ahead at full tilt, trying to anticipate everything the child would need. Crib, diapers, toys, music lessons, public school, college, a society debut if it were a girl, oh, and then grandchildren. The thought stopped me cold and left me breathless. This was the start of my line. The line I had thought I would never get to have. I pulled Sarah close to me, hugging her fervently and rocking her back and forth. I was quite surprised to find my face wet with tears when I came up for air. Sarah giggled through her own happy tears and tried to wipe mine away. I caught her hand and kissed it. Oh, Sarah, you don't know how glad this makes me. I think I was afraid to admit how much I wanted this. To think that we might never have gotten here if we'd listened to that quack. What a miracle. I paused to catch my breath. 6 months, you say? She nodded.
I think it happened that night you came home with your new contract for that ventriloquist. You were so excited that night.
I don't think that ventriloquist ever did figure out why I added $50 to his next pay envelope.